Chapter 21. Mason. Mason couldn't believe he was going to have to watch this game from the sidelines. He was grateful they had advanced, but not being able to play was excruciating, almost as hard as seeing Clara. He hadn't spoken to her since the botched movie night, but he assumed she had filled Justin in on the situation because Davis, the other offensive trainer, had checked in with him a few times over the last few days. Over the phone and not in person, but at least he hadn't had to deal with Clara. Yet. "You gonna be okay over here?" Blaine asked as he spun a football in his hands. It was almost time for warm-ups, and Mason appreciated the gesture of his captain stopping by to check on him. Blaine hadn't been the only teammate. It seemed almost everyone had wanted to see how he was doing on the flight over. Mason shrugged. "Not my favorite place to watch a game, but I'm glad to be here." Blaine nodded as if he understood the feeling. "It wouldn't be a game without you. Look, I know this is hard, but you cheer for us the same as you would if you were playing. That energy will carry us forward, and we'll take home that championship ring again this year." "Yeah, sounds good, man." Mason had been trying to make peace with the fact that he wouldn't play the rest of this season, but it was still hard. Add that to the night he'd had with Clara, and it had been a rough week for sure. A whistle sounded, and Blake flashed a wave before heading out onto the field for warm-ups. Mason sat down on the sideline bench and stretched his ankle out. The pain was diminishing, but it still screamed at him when he spent too much time on it. "Is this seat taken?" Mason looked up to see Clara standing at the edge of the bench. He shrugged and scooted over to make room for her. Though he still wasn't sure how he felt about her at the moment, Duke's words reminded him that he shouldn't judge until he had all the facts. "I wanted to apologize to you," she said, running her hands down her thighs. "I should have told my dad I was with you." "So why didn't you?" Clara took a deep breath. "My dad has controlled my life for a long time. He wasn't always that way, but when my mom died, he became super protective." Mason scoffed. Super protective was not the word he would use to describe her father. Insolent and overbearing seemed like much better adjectives. Clara offered a small smile. "Anyway, part of why I took this job was to get out from under my father's thumb, but I guess some habits die hard. I was afraid if he knew that I was working on your team, or with you, that he might try to make me go back to the University of Texas." "Why does your father hate me so much?" He watched as Clara sighed and tucked a strand of her hair behind her ears. "I don't think he hates you, Mason. He just never thought you were good enough for me." Ouch. Though Mason had figured that was the reason, hearing her say it still hurt. "The thing is," she turned to him, looking him in the eyes for the first time since she sat down. "He's wrong. You are good enough for me. Maybe too good for me." "Too good for her? What do you mean?" "Clara, it's time to get set up." Justin's voice called from over her shoulder. "Let's do dinner later and I'll tell you everything, okay?" He wanted to ask more questions, to demand that she stay and explain what she meant, but he could see the pleading in her eyes, as well as Justin's impatient stance a few feet away. "Okay, dinner." "Thank you." She squeezed his arm and flashed a small smile before darting off to help Justin and Davis finish setting up. Mason watched her, wondering what she wanted to tell him. Perhaps this was good, though. It would give him time to sort out his own thoughts before they had a heart-to-heart conversation. Mason gripped the edge of the bench as the 2-minute buzzer went off. This game had been another close one, and the Tornadoes were only up by 3 points. A field goal from the other team would tie the game, and a touchdown would mean the Tornadoes were done. He wasn't sure if it was because he wasn't playing or because it was now up to the defense, but Mason had never felt so stressed in a game. The offensive line, including Blaine, Tucker, and Jefferson, paced around near him. They too could do nothing unless the other team lost the ball, and he realized they must feel as helpless as he did, at least for the moment. The 2-minute warning ended, and the defensive line jogged back out onto the field. It was 1st and 10, and their job was to keep the other side from advancing down the field or scoring. The crowd noise was so deafening that Mason couldn't even hear the count from his position on the field, but he saw the ball go flying through the air. He held his breath, hoping the receiver would miss, but the ball landed perfectly in his arms, and though he was tackled immediately, the other team had just gained another 8 yards. A few more yards would put them into field goal range. A blocked run was the next play, and Mason's heartbeat thundered in his ears. 3rd and 2 wasn't much, but if the defense could hold them, it might be the end of the game. Of course, there was a chance the other team would attempt a field goal kick, even if they were slightly out of range as a last resort. He'd seen miracle kicks win games before. The 3rd down play ended with a dropped ball, and Mason held his breath. This was the moment of truth. Either the team would try to get the 2 yards, or they would attempt a field goal kick. He hoped they would go for the latter. The chances a kicker would miss from this far out was better than the chance they wouldn't get the 2 yards. He held his breath, waiting to see what they'd choose. He sighed when the kicker remained on the sidelines. His hand ran across the back of his neck as he watched the teams line up again. Having expected a run, he was surprised when the ball flew through the air. Surprise turned to disappointment as the ball was caught well within field goal range. The clock was still ticking, though, only a minute to go. After a rushed lineup, the quarterback spiked the ball, bringing the downs to 2nd and 10 with 50 seconds left on the clock. Plenty of time if the defense didn't do their job. Mason felt like his heart was being squeezed by a giant vice. He always felt excitement during games, but sitting here, watching, seemed more nerve-wracking than normal. The 3rd down play resulted in no gain, and this time the kicker did come out on the field. A 45-yard field goal wasn't a shoo-in, but it was well within this kicker's range. Mason bit down on the knuckle of his index finger as the kicker lined up. This could go 2 ways. Either he made it and the game went into overtime, or he missed and the Tornadoes moved on. The clock continued counting down, and the ball was snapped. The kicker's form appeared perfect as the ball went sailing through the air. Mason followed it with his eyes, feeling like he was watching it spiral and spin in slow motion as it headed for the goalposts. It was a little far to the right, but when it landed on the other side, Mason couldn't tell if it had been good or just outside the posts. He turned to look at the large screen for a replay and nearly jumped to his feet when he saw the ball was outside the posts. A massive cheer went up around him as the players high-fived and clapped shoulders. They had done it. They'd made it to the championship game again. Though Mason was happy for the win, he still felt the sting of disappointment. He'd be watching the championship game from the sidelines this year, instead of playing. "We did it," Jefferson said, coming up to him. "You did. Great game." Mason forced a smile to his face. It wasn't Jefferson's fault that he didn't get to play. No, that was his fault and his alone. Jefferson's smile faded into an expression of understanding. "I know it's hard not playing, but believe me, there are worse things than missing a game." His eyes took on a sadness that didn't normally reside there, and Mason wondered what was hiding in Jefferson's past. Just as quickly, his eyes brightened, and he clapped Mason on the shoulder. "Besides, I learned almost everything I know from you, so it's like you were out there, in spirit at least." "Almost, huh?" Mason knew Jefferson was trying to make him feel better, and he appreciated the gesture. Jefferson shrugged and flashed a teasing grin. "I did know some things before I met you. Had to get on the team somehow, right?" His comical expression made Mason chuckle, and the cloud of sadness receded a little bit. He did have a lot to be thankful for, including his dinner with Clara later, that hopefully would reveal if a future romance between the two of them had a chance.